What Patriots are you downgrading if Tom Brady hits the road? Is A.J. Green destined to be a non-Bengal in 2020? And can a draft bust be the better choice at wideout over a major draft hit this past season? Plus, the 2019-2020 world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge third runner-up Stephen Ranaghan is here to discuss LeVeon Bell, Alshon Jeffrey, and much more. We've got a great show for you. Stephen Ranaghan is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour starts now.
Hey, everybody, if you got what it takes.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now listening to the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com with your hosts Eric Balkman and Dave Gerzak. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for football analysis from the best fantasy players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here are Eric Balkman and Dave Gerzak.
With the master rhymer, that's the lead behind the video rapper. You know the top driver, tapper.
Hey, thanks a lot, Rob. Greetings and salutations to each and every one of you, Balkaholics and Gerzak addicts. Welcome to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com. I am, of course, your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman. My co-host is normally the patron saint of fantasy football, the Dizzle, Dave Gerzak. However, we have a very special co-host on to co-host tonight. He is a two-time overall winner in the fantasy football industry. He's been playing fantasy sports for a little over a decade now, recently finished fourth place in the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge, off and on a DFS player, and a winner of nearly $500,000 over the past 14 months. He's here to tell us how he did it tonight. Please welcome the pride of Massachusetts. It's Stephen Ranaghan. Stephen, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Eric, how you doing? A pleasure to be on. Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. You know, I feel like we've exchanged so many emails over the last decade or so, and it's a shame that it's taken so long to get you on tonight. But here you are, celebrating a banner last 14, 15 months or so, you know, celebrating almost $500,000 in prizes. Has it sunk in yet? Has all those, you know, I know we're talking about the playoff challenge tonight where you were the third runner-up, almost won the $500,000, but has it sunk in winning all these prizes over the last 14 months yet?
Yeah, it's just starting to sink in. You know, like you said, it's been kind of an amazing, year and a half or so, just, getting up to the top of these leaderboards and things like that. It's been pretty exciting. I feel like one of them's feeding off, the next one, and just kind of gaining more confidence. And, like I said, I think they're just sort of feeding off one another. So it's been great,
That's awesome. We are definitely going to get into more of that tonight. We're going to talk about your big wins. We're going to take a look towards the goings-on in the 2020 FFPC early drafts and much more. Hey, I want to give a shout-out to the chat room right now. Feel free to post any questions you might have in there. If you want to connect with us on Twitter, the show is at HSFF Hour. I am at Eric Balkman. Facebook.com/HSFF Hour is where to get hold of us. 347-426-3682. That's 347-GAME-OVA. If you want to give us a call, talk to me and Stephen tonight, that'd be great. HighStakesFantasyFootball@gmail.com is the email address to get a hold of. We'll try to get to all the chat room questions, the tweets, and the emails in the fantasy feedback segment later on in the show. Our producer and mutual friend Rob, our audio engineer, and my best friend Bryce are monitoring those tonight, and we'll try to get to all of them tonight. So, this is the time. We're in late February. Fantasy football has not peaked yet. Obviously, we're kind of in the midst of FFPC drafting season as far as the best ball goes. But if you want to get your questions answered, definitely now is the time to send those emails in. Big announcement with the FFPC today. Best Ball Slim Leagues are announced. So that they're announced, they're launched. You can sign up for them at myffpc.com. 18-round drafts. no kickers, no defenses, and the standard FFPC starting lineup. So definitely check those out. Register for those today. You can jump in those. And obviously our traditional FFPC best balls also active at myffpc.com. You can sign up for those at the $35, $77, and $250 levels. Don't forget the FFPC main event early bird is open right now. You can save $100 off your initial squad, $400 off each initial team as you try to compete for that $500,000 grand prize that we're going to award at the end of the 2020 season. And plenty of Dynasty Orphans also available right now, myffpc.com. Plenty of good ones out there, too. A lot of good discounted prices. So if you've been thinking about jumping in and making the switch to Dynasty or adding on some Dynasty teams to your FFPC portfolio, a lot of good options for you right now. I invite you to check that out at myffpc.com. All right, let's get into tonight's interview with Stephen Ranaghan. Stephen, we're going to get into the fantasy football portion of the show shortly, but can you tell the listeners when you are not dominating all these national contests as you have been over the past 18 months, can you tell us what you're doing for a living?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I work as a information security architect, typically for banks, governments, things like that. So basically just securing, different assets that companies may have. So, it's a pretty meaningful job. I enjoy it. And, it's quite analytical and things like that. So I think sometimes it crosses over a little bit to, some of the sports analytics and things like that. So it's, it's definitely a very rewarding job. And, I've been doing it for about probably 20 years or so. So I'm pretty well into it by now. So it's good.
So not only is there a crossover of skills there with fantasy football, it obviously gives you the freedom to draft a lot of teams as you have been doing over the last few years too. It's a good complement as far as work goes to your fantasy football career as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely it's definitely been good to utilize some of those skills. I will say that your site FFPC, it's you've definitely had a lot of new enhancements over the past 3 or 4 years. They've definitely helped for just doing things like free agents and things like that. So I think in that respect, I think you folks are like the best out there for that UI and just the ease of use and everything and the look and feel and things like that. So that matters when you're drafting and you're doing free agents and things like that. So I think it's been great as far as that goes too.
You are too kind, my friend. We're always trying to get better incrementally each and every season. So thank you. That obviously means a lot. I want to congratulate you, number one, on finishing near the top of the heap in the 2019-2020 World Famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. 4th place overall, 3rd runner-up, nice $12,500 payday. I know you were hoping for more. You were in the in the running for much more as well in that competition. And I'm going to bring up, and just so the listeners are aware of what your squad was that ended up taking 4th place. The quarterback was Patrick Mahomes. At running back, you had Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, Raheem Mostert, and Derrick Henry. So you went with the 4 running backs. Wide receivers are DK Metcalf, DeAndre Hopkins there. Tight end was Mark Andrews. You had Stephen Hauschka, the kicker from Buffalo, and then obviously the New England Patriots defense as well. So I know you had a top 10 finish in the FFPC Divisional Challenge as well. Can you tell us a little bit about, specifically in the original playoff challenge, how you sort of formulated this lineup, how you came to settling on this specific one for this entry?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think in doing, like a few teams, really, I thought, the 2 that I really liked were obviously Lamar Jackson, like most people. And then, I thought that Mahomes could get there if things worked out the right way, right? You see sometimes, in the playoffs year by year, you see some of these teams get knocked out. So, I thought, hey, if the Ravens get knocked out, that's a clear path for Mahomes, and I think a lot of people were down on them at that time. So I think my thinking was kind of a little bit from a DFS perspective to kind of say, hey, look, I think, probably not as many people will have such a talented QB as that. So I thought, I'll kind of, sort of position myself, with those 2 players, right? So obviously, not 2 pretty good ones to sort of position yourself with, I think. And then definitely as far as Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thoughts, Steven.
Yeah, and you know, I think you brought up a good point. You know, with some of the running backs, I sort of thought, you know, sometimes, you know, in some of the playoffs games, you know, it really depends on like the game script, I think too, where, you know, I find some of these playoff games where, you know, they played a little bit closer to the vest, right? So that tends to favor some of the running backs, right? So I mean, it's just, you know, it's hard to predict that ahead of time, right? But you really feel like, hey, you know, if these games go, you know, the way that I envision them, right? I think the running backs, you know, could be more involved. So that was definitely part of, you know, some of my thinking there. And then, you know, I really wasn't very high on the Patriots myself, you know, and I really didn't like them this year. So I thought, hey, you know, their defense would be really good. But I think, you know, what really cost me and, you know, not being able to move even further up, I think it was, you know, with that kicker and defense selection, really, I kind of didn't maximize those. And I think that's one of the hardest parts of the contest. It really, you know, when I sit down and I pick these, I sort of agonize over what I'm going to do with my strategy with this. So I think that's a sign of a really good contest. The contest is unbelievable. It's you know, great structured and, you know, simple in some ways too, right? But it's like, you know, once you get more into it and you really kind of want to move up there, right? You know, you gotta, you know, there's, you know, sort of multiple trains of thought, I think.
All right, so a couple of questions right off the top of the bat when I hear your analysis of how you put this squad together. You talked about running backs and the importance of running backs and the importance of game script. Talk a little bit about why the decision for you when it came down to New Orleans Saints. Why did you go with Alvin Kamara over Michael Thomas, a guy who definitely was a favorite among a lot of people in this competition? Why did you go Kamara over Thomas?
Yeah, I guess I really was thinking, you know, that he'd be so heavily owned. Really, I almost didn't really want to par that because I just really felt like, you know, I guess I felt like they could match each other, you know, and if one was gonna, you know, make more of a difference, you know, as the contest moved through, it would probably be Kamara. But I mean, it's really a toss-up, right? You know, and again, that's what I said. I think it's some of the teams, right? You really just, you know, it's basically, you know, almost a toss-up with two or three of the teams that I saw. And, you know, I think we'll get to a point. I actually heard you on talking with Howard Bender, you know, talking about the San Francisco pick, about how, you know, you had, you know, discussed that with some folks and thought, you know, that really, you know, was going to be the pivotal team to decide who to take. And that actually really helped me quite a bit, actually, you know, in picking some of this, that analysis and, you know, in your comments with, you know, Howard. So that's just a little thought on that.
You know, what's funny about that is you know, we were talking about that on the Fantasy Alarm with Howard, and one of the reasons I brought that up was because I was talking with Mike Parecco, who actually won the 2019 FFPC main event this past year, the $500,000, and I was talking with him because I know he's played in the Playoff Challenge before, and he said he thought the key would be San Francisco, and one of the guys we kept saying over and over and over again is, why not Raheem Mostert? Why not the running back that conceivably could run all over the teams that they play in the playoffs, and certainly they did in both Minnesota and Green Bay to get to the Super Bowl. And he had a decent showing against Kansas City, too. Even though they didn't come up with the win, he certainly put out a big effort there. So I think Mostert was huge, and that's something we'll definitely look at in years to come. You are in the heart of New England, Stephen. You said you didn't like the Patriots this past year. Tell us a little bit why you didn't like the Patriots advancing and whether you think that the Patriots might be on the downturn in 2020 as far as fantasy football drafts go as well.
Yeah. So I think some of the people that know me around here will probably laugh at this. I've never really been a huge Patriots fan, just, you know, for various reasons. You know, I probably won't get into it. I won't bore you with it. But, I mean, especially this year, I felt like, you know, I felt the defense had, like, a really nice schedule, and that was kind of the key, you know, that I was focusing on, like, from a macro perspective, I guess. And, you know, a lot of their position players I just really wasn't into. You know, I think some years they get into the playoffs and they really benefit from, like, a much softer schedule. And I know some of these differences are somewhat minor, but when you have some of these advantages, that stuff adds up, right? You know, when you're winning games by a field goal or you're able to rest bodies for like 2 weeks as opposed to a week and things like that. So, you know, I especially with them sort of, I think, on the downturn, as you mentioned, I just really wasn't high on many of their position players this year. There are some at times, that I'll gravitate towards too if I see, just different things that I like for different reasons. But I definitely do see them, on a downturn. And obviously, real football and fantasy football, they're two different things, right? They still could do well, but really from a fantasy perspective, I just think the way that Belichick sort of runs the, sort of has oversight, I guess, over the offense is a better thing to say. I think obviously Josh McDaniels is running most of it, but it's just sort of it's really about spreading the ball around, spreading the offense out, sort of some of that like quasi like West Coast stuff. It just really doesn't benefit someone who you'd want in fantasy that really kind of can get that volume, right? And like I said, I think there are some exceptions, but I think that's as a rule, something to look at as far as that team goes, I would say.
I just want to jump ahead very briefly. We're going to get back to your success in season long here over the last couple of years. But Tom Brady is a free agent. We know he's going to meet with a bunch of teams in the NFL that are looking for a starting quarterback. If he does indeed leave New England and they have a new quarterback this year, are you downgrading just as a result all of the Patriots on that offense as far as fantasy drafts go this season? Or is there somebody that you think can retain value and hold value or maybe have his value increased regardless of who the quarterback will be for the New England Patriots this season?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little tough to say, but I mean, like if I broke it down position by position, if you look at the tight end, obviously you don't know who's going to be in there yet, right? So, and then when you look at wide receivers, it's like Brady's never been able to really get on the same page with a lot of those wide receivers, right? For whatever reason, whether it's the system or, he likes them, to run a route, and if it's off by half a step, he's yelling at them and their confidence wanes and things like that. So, I mean, obviously you have Edelman and things like that, but I mean, I tend to think he gets overdrafted at times. And then obviously you have, kicker and things like that, where that, that could be, viable. And obviously I think the defense, in certain years is very playable. Brady, I think, is like really, really hasn't been a fantasy presence maybe for 6 or 8 years or something along that timeline. And I do think, at times the running back, you can kind of, get some value out of that. But I think, they're losing their offensive line coach this year. So, and it's, I think like he's not as well known around the country, Dante Scarnecchia. And I think that has a big effect on a lot of things. I think it has a big effect on the protection and things like that. But it'd be interesting to see like what the offensive line coach, what type of style he's ran and things like that. So, I really don't think much is there, but I think, at times, there could be, I don't know if that makes sense, but.
No, it does. It absolutely does. And the one player I want to ask you about that you actually brought up is Julian Edelman. Right now in FFPC best ball drafts, he is going off as the 705 pick, mid-7th round right now, as the 30th receiver off the board, and the 4 receivers going directly in front of him, Deebo Samuel, Tyler Boyd, Terry McLaurin, and T.Y. Hilton, and then obviously Julian Edelman in the mid-7th. Does that seem like a good buy to you right now, Stephen, where you would be willing to take a chance on Edelman, or does that still seem too high?
I think that's fairly priced. For me, that's not somewhere I'd go, really. But I do think it's fairly priced just because, he can be impactful. But I just think there's so many unknowns really with, I think Brady's completion percentage dropped like lower than it has in history and things like that. I mean, he's a great receiver, but I mean, he does benefit a little bit from volume too. So I think it goes back to sort of, what are the pieces going to be in play there? And I think eventually they're going to start, trying to, preserve him a little bit. I mean, I would, but, I could see that, kind of in the future. But I mean, I've never been big on him from a fantasy perspective. So I think in the future, for me, I would pass. But from looking at it from a pure value standpoint, I would say that it's fairly priced from a market perspective, I guess.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. I think the other thing to keep in mind is Julian Edelman, nobody's ever really drafted him for his ceiling necessarily. I mean, they draft him for the comfortability, the fact that kind of what you're getting in him and that he usually performs at that level. Now, another thing to keep in mind, this dude's going to turn 34 years old before the start of next season, so he's getting a little long in the tooth, and when you consider his potential quarterback also being even more longer in the tooth, I think you can definitely shoot for the moon and go with a younger guy like Deebo Samuel, like Terry McLaurin there, and hope for better things. I want to get back to your success in the last couple of years. A pair of $200,000 grand prizes. Congratulations to you on that. That has been awesome. Plenty of high-stakes players pine after. You're very welcome. Plenty of high-stakes players pine after one of those six-figure grand prizes. You got two of them, and then you almost got another one in the playoff challenge this past year, too. So kind of take us through the process the last couple of years of what it was like watching Week 16, especially in 2018, with so much on the line, given that you had never achieved such a high grand prize like that before in your career.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. As you said earlier, I've played, off and on through the years. So, sometimes, a little more, sometimes a little less. And, at times, I'll explain to people, I get my money back, or, maybe I'll win a little or I'll lose a little. And, you just, I think it's, at times it got a little frustrating for me, just kind of going through it because I felt like I had the knowledge and things like that. But I think, maybe over the past, maybe 5 years, and I alluded to this, in a prior conversation, I just think I've sort of focused a little more, at, certain things, certain concepts and things like that, but just being more attentive to things, and picking out sort of little things and little pieces of information, that can really help me. So, yeah, I mean, I just, last year, I was extremely high on Mahomes, and I really couldn't understand why people, really weren't so into to drafting him. Watching him throw, watching him come onto the scene, I just thought, wow, that to me is it's perfect. This guy's going to be unbelievable. And I had a lot of teams with him, and the team that I won on last year, ironically enough, he wasn't on it, and that's why I was shocked because I had a lot of, I had a lot of Mahomes teams, and I was like, wow, this guy's going nuts, having the variations with him, I just thought, wow, this is, this is going to work with him. And, like I said, ironically enough, the team that I won with didn't have him. It actually had, it had Deshaun Watson and Goff as the QBs. And I was pretty high on Goff last year as well. And I had him quite a bit, and he was pretty cheap. Yeah, I just, it was kind of interesting because, I had a team lurking, but I really wasn't sure that it would, kind of continue to move up like it did last year. And I had some injuries and things like that. And luckily I had drafted some backups, and, I had a very good bench on that team last year, which wasn't the case this year. So, when I looked at my team last year after the fact, I thought, wow, that's, as far as roster construction, you hear people talk about roster construction. It was it was a really solid lineup, and it was just so well balanced and things like that. And some of the folks in the other contests, they were looking at the team, and they're like, you're going to win this thing. That team is loaded. Some of the bench players could be playing for the starters that you have, and I was just like, well, I don't really see it because, as you said, from playing, years before, you have, injuries and things like that. I can't tell you how many times I had probably, a great player and he goes down in the 13th week or something. Or I remember one year I had Luck and Hilton, and, they were going crazy every week. And the 16th week, I think they, he passed for 70 yards or something, So it's just, I think with the experience, you understand that that a lot of these things can go wrong, right? I mean, how many of these people in these contests have great teams and just, they win a little bit of money, you don't hear anything about it, but if you looked at the team, you'd be like, oh my God, how did that team not win, right? So it's, there's a little bit of luck, there's a little bit of, kind of, walking your way through the maze, I guess. So that was last year. And then this year, I had a team that was just very well constructed from a starting lineup, but my bench was terrible. And I had some really good pickups, as the year went on that really saved me. I really grinded, on the pickups, and they really totally saved me, as far as that team goes. So I don't know if that makes sense or, but that's that's kind of the kind of brief synopsis, I guess, of kind of how those two went, from a general perspective.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And I'll ask you this too, for somebody like you who's been pretty accomplished, winning a significant amount of money each and every year, to the point where you're winning six-figure grand prizes. For you, it was just being that, just taking it a notch up as far as attentiveness, taking it a notch up as far as waiver wire bids, and maybe being a little bit more aggressive on that, because a lot of times I think people. They sit down to these high-stake drafts or mid-stake drafts or what have you, and they do the draft, and they're like, well, this team's dead in the water. And, for a small section of teams, that is true. But the waiver wire, totally important, can make or break your season. And obviously, this past year, in 2019, Stephen, it obviously made your season, being that much more, just a little bit more attentive on the waiver wire, made all the difference in the world to you.
Yeah. No, I'll give you a quick example where, on my team this year, I think I had the Carolina defense. That was literally the one defense I had, and I just thought to myself, I said, if this team's going to do anything, it's not doing anything with that defense, right? They were getting gashed on the ground, and all, the winning running backs were on, the team, I think, going against their defense for 4 straight weeks or 6 out of 7 or something. It's something ridiculous. But they had been good early in the year, and I thought, okay, there's 13 defenses out here. I have to find the one that's going to be the best out of this, and none of them were obvious. And I also added A.J. Brown. Somebody had dropped at A.J. Brown, so that was massive because I had Ridley go down. And once Ridley went down, like I said, I had no depth. I was shocked that I got him because I only had a certain amount of money and nobody had bid on him. He had a couple of bad games, and I was just I remember looking at the wire. I was I had bid on 5 different people, and I got every one of them, so, kind of like you're saying, you kind of never know, sometimes you're going to get outbid and things like that, but you got to, it is about grinding a little bit, I guess.
I like it. Stephen Ranaghan joining us, the 4th place team in the 2019-2020 world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. Of course, a winner of 2 separate $200,000 grand prizes in the high-stakes fantasy football industry over the last 2 years as well. And as we look forward to drafts this year, Stephen, in 2020, there are a ton of free agent running backs who have flooded the market, no question. If you were drafting right now, like so many FFPC players are, who would you be most scared of drafting as far as the running backs? And I'll give you a few examples. We don't know where any of these guys are going to be going. We don't know if Derrick Henry, Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler, Kenyon Drake, Kareem Hunt, we don't know if they're going to sign with the team they were with last year. We don't know if they're going to go somewhere else. We don't know what the role is going to be. So if you were drafting early right now, who would be the most scary running back to be drafting out of any of those? Or another running back as well?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it kind of goes in backwards order, I guess. I think Kareem Hunt, I love the talent, but I just think with guys like that, you just can't trust them, with all the stuff that's going on sort of off the field. You just, I think it would depend on the draft price, right? But if it was anything, that was of any, type of draft equity, as they say, right? I don't think I would go there in any way. I mean, it depends. Obviously, it depends on kind of what your team looks like at that time, right? So there's a lot of variables to it, but I don't think I'd touch that, especially if he was sticking with that team too. I mean, sometimes you can say, okay, yeah, they released him and he went to another team. You might kind of take a second look, but that, and I'd say, and I think I probably have a blind spot with this, but I think Drake, I'm not overly crazy over him. I don't know. I know there's a ton of people that, see a lot, in him, and I think in that offense it's great, but I just really don't see it, working out quite as well, but he looked unbelievable towards the end of the year, so that might be something I might have to, kind of look at further. I think some of the other running backs, that you mentioned earlier, I think those are, definitely, viable running backs that you can use, like guys like Gordon and Eckler and things like that. I think, although with, San Diego, you don't know, you don't really know who they're going to bring in, right? So it's I think you got to really look at, what the quarterback's going to be there. Henry, I've been a Henry guy for 5 years, so I'd be, all over drafting him. Just, think the talent has always been there. I just never think they were able to utilize the guy the right way. I mean, you could see that like in different spots. Even when he had terrible games, you could see that once he kind of got into a rhythm, you know, you'd start to see him like break off like 6 and 7 yard runs like pretty consistently. And certain things like that you got to look for, right? You sort of, it kind of flashes and spurts, but it's sort of like, I think a lot of these teams kind of hold some of these guys back, whether it's system or, coach belief or coach's guys and all that type of stuff.
You know what's bizarre to me, Stephen, and we talk about these running backs here, is how high FFPC drafters are taking these guys. Again, they're all free agents. We don't know what role or where these guys are going to end up. You look at Derrick Henry, he's going at the 108 on average. You look at Austin Eckler, 211. Kenyon Drake, 304. Melvin Gordon at the 307. The guy who has been lowest among those has been Kareem Hunt, who's going at the 602. And I don't even know if I'm on board to take Kareem Hunt at the 602. So I think if I was drafting early, I think the smart decision might, especially in best ball, might be going with guys who are a little bit more set, at least early in the drafts, as far as what their role is going to be, as far as what team they're going to be on, as far as what's going to be expected of them. I don't know if there's much to gain when you're drafting guys at their potential ceiling that early in drafts. I mean, Austin Eckler, if he lands in the perfect position, is he going to be better than the 211 pick this year? I'm not so sure. But could he be a lot worse than the 211 pick? Definitely. So I think I would probably be shying away from guys like that early in drafts and going for guys that I think are a little bit more established, a little bit more well-known, a little bit more where I know what they're going to perform this year. I'm fine with taking chances on guys. I'm fine with taking some risk. I don't know if it's worth the risk at the top of the draft. I think it's more, likely for me at least to be taking risks in the middle of drafts. And I think that's a lot of times where drafts have been won. I want to ask you about a certain running back that we haven't talked about yet tonight. Well, not just one singular running back, but a backfield. The Redskins they just exercised the option on Adrian Peterson. He will be in Washington under Ron Rivera in 2020. And this kind of is a little bit confusing because they drafted Bryce Love and whatever it was in the 4th round last year. They still have Adrian Peterson. And obviously, their 2nd-round pick, Darius Geis, flashed last year. So how do you handle in drafts this Washington running back situation if you were drafting right now? And just to let everybody behind the curtain, as far as an ADP goes for these Washington running backs, Darius Geis is going on average at the 609. Adrian Peterson on average is going at the 1907. Bryce Love is going on average at the 2203, and I guess I could bring up Chris Thompson as well as long as we're talking about him. He's going on average at the 2112. So you're looking at Thompson, Love, Adrian Peterson all going very late. Darius Geis going in the 6th round. How would you handle this? Would you be taking a stab late on the Washington running backs, or do you like the price of Darius Geis right now?
Yeah, definitely not into Peterson. I mean, I don't really see that as, I think that's probably pretty common sentiment amongst, people that, again, I could be wrong. He could go crazy next year. I think with Geis, I think it's, obviously the talent's there. He's got like that history, right? The injury history and things like that. But I think it's, he's one of those guys where it's a pure it's like flip a coin, right? It's either going to work or it isn't. And I think, once you brought up his name, it made me think of the times when I draft 2 teams and I draft Geis on both the teams and he'd go down in the first week and my whole season's over, right? So that's why, I think, if you can draft multiple teams, right, you sometimes can say, you know what, I can take a chance here on Geis on, whatever, 10% of them or 5, whatever the number is that you're doing, right, based on, different things, right? But yeah, I do definitely, I could see, Geis being a value. Again, it's risky though, right? So it could, that's one of those ones where it could just kind of swing either way. And I think some of the late running backs, there's always value there, right? It's just, kind of like, how does it all fit in, right? As far as the system and things like that, and kind of, injuries or kind of how are things looking, for them as an offense.
Stephen Ranaghan, the fourth-place team in the 2019-2020 FFPC Playoff Challenge, joining us here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour this week. Eric Balkman coming at you. I want to talk a little bit about the 2020 draft specifically. You know, we've had them going off at the FFPC for a little over a month now, and I don't know if you've seen the ADP. That's fine. If you have, if you haven't, that's cool. But what I want to get into is okay, perfect. So, Stephen, a guy that you think is being overdrafted or at least will be overdrafted when we get deep into drafting season by FFPC players, and then conversely, who's a mid-round, maybe a late-round sleeper that you think is going to fly under the radar that could actually pay off big time for any FFPC players that draft them late?
Yeah, I think, you know, and I mean, this isn't, you know, I looked at some ADP quickly over the past, week or so, very, very quickly. You know, someone that I'm just never, ever into is, you know, I think Beckham, you know, I think he'll be, you know, overvalued. Again, it could work out, you know, that's just someone I see. Guys like, you know, and this is just someone, and sometimes there's great players that are out there and I just won't draft them. I just and someone who I think that actually is Ezekiel Elliott. I just won't draft him. And I have at times, and it just never seems to work out, you know, you know, I'm sure you've seen that where, you know, somebody may win something with him and then, but, you know, whatever it is, you know, a reason for, you know, you had him 1 year and then he gets hurt, or, you know, you have him in the playoffs and they go up 40-0 and he just, you know, he doesn't do anything for you. Right. So, and I mean, you know, the line is unbelievable. I think that there's other backs that could do the exact same thing that he does. And that would lead me to another overvalued guy who I think is LeVeon Bell. And I've thought that for a while. Same thing. You know, great. I think he's a really, really good pass catcher, but I think both those guys, you know, I think, you know, and it's sort of a useless comment, I guess, because, right, they run behind the offensive lines they run to. But, you know, when I look at them as pure runners, I just see them. I mean, obviously Elliott's a good runner, but to me, I see him as a little bit overrated. So I just am always just you know what, I'm just, you know, if he goes off and he's, you know, the MVP or something, then fine, I'll deal with it. And I'll just, I'll just kind of go with that. But, you know, I'd say, you know, I think the Niners running backs, I think they'll be sort of a little bit kind of overvalued, you know, in some ways. You know, I just think, you know, you'll see them overdrafted, you know, and I think in some instances it may be okay. But I mean, guys like Kevin Coleman, you know, just never, you know, it's, you know, guys like him, I think he can, you know, yeah, there'll be some year he may put it all together, right? But it's more, you know, it's you know, you can see him get going for 1 or 2 games and then he's out. He's out of the game on the third play of the game, right, because he's injured, right? And I just don't know if it's you know, soft tissue injuries or they're, you know, it's just, you know, some, you know, underlying issue or whatever. But it's you can almost predict it like clockwork, you know, with guys like him. But, you know, I'd say the first two are probably a little more surprising. You know, but then at some point those guys like Bell, they drop so far that they become a value too. So it's sort of a situational thing, right?
So let me ask you about that, Stephen, because Le'Veon Bell, to me, and he just keeps sinking like a stone. Right now in FFPC best balls, he's the running back 18 in the early 4th round. He's going on average off at the 401, right behind Todd Gurley and Devin Singletary, right ahead of Chris Carson, DeAndre Swift. He will be a rookie out of Georgia. He's going in the early 4th round too. Le'Veon Bell slipping to the 4th round. This is a dude who's going in the mid to late first last year. Is that enough of a value for you to get in business with Le'Veon Bell, or is he still not plunged far enough for you to want to draft him?
Yeah, I think it's you know, I was going to comment about this. It comes down to I think, his roster construction. So how does your roster look like at that point, right? And, you know, sometimes I've done that where, you know, I may have a player that I don't really care for, but, you know, I know okay, you're sort of cornered, or you're, you know, you say, okay, well, you know, that guy may fit this roster, you know, something like that. So, you know, I think in spots it could, but, you know, I have these blind spots, you know, with certain players, good and bad, and I think it helps me in some instances, and it's hurt me too, right? But, you know, like a guy like him, I just, you know, I see some of the off-field stuff, you know, making rap videos and stuff like that. It just doesn't seem to me like he's that devoted to what he's doing. And, you know, I think the pass catching, he's great. You know, I think if he was on the right team that could utilize him in certain ways, you know, he could, you know, probably have a really good year. But, I think that's something, like you said, I'll probably be trying to watch and see, how far he falls to kind of determine that.
Stephen, we obviously talked about your $12,500 payday in the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge, but you also have $400,000 over the last year and a half as well from various national contests, championships. Number one, have you spent any of that money? Do you have any plans for that money? And how do you picture yourself blowing all that cash, that great windfall that you were able to take advantage of thanks to your fantasy prowess?
Yeah, I really haven't spent much of it. I mean, I just paid off bills, that were, kind of stupid nagging bills and stuff like that. I really haven't thought about, spending it. I thought about, maybe joining a private country club just because it's, makes life a little bit easier. Instead of trying to find public course tee times and stuff like that, because that, to me, if it were priced right, would be a value to me. But it's, I mean, I've said this before. It's really the money part of it. It's it's cool, but it's just the fact of doing it. It's something I thought I could always do, and then doing it. It's more I guess a goal, right? We all have goals, and obviously you have career goals, personal goals, and you just have stuff like this. It's just fun, but it was just a quirky goal of mine, and I reached that, and that was really rewarding for me. So I'm sure I'll figure out something with the money, but in all 100% honesty, I just it doesn't, that part of it doesn't affect me as much as honestly just doing it.
Good for you, man. And I think I would have the same approach to you as well. To consider it an achievement that many people never even get to enjoy once, and you've done it twice in the span of a year and a half, almost did it 3 times in the span of a year and a half, and I'm sure much more success is going to come your way down the road, too, as well. Hey, I want to get into some fantasy news around the NFL, you bet, as we come into the final third of the show here. I want to thank Football Guys, Roto World, and Rob for tonight's rundown. Let's get into this report from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, Jarvis Landry had hip surgery. He's expected to miss the next 6 to 8 months. He had surgery 2.5 weeks ago, so he's questionable for training camp, obviously. And week 1 is far from a given at this point as well. The team does expect him to be ready for the Browns season opener, and Landry obviously has always battled through injuries and surgery recoveries with aplomb. He's been very good with that, but when you're coming back from major surgery, everybody's human, except for Adrian Peterson, I think, is the only one who's not. Landry's operation, quote, shaved down some cartilage, removed 2 pieces of bone embedded in the labrum of his left hip. Okay, so this is interesting now as far as how you handle him in drafts now, Stephen. And as I look at the FFPC ADP and how those FFPC drafters are handling Jarvis Landry, and again, this ADP, some of these drafts happened prior to this surgery being announced, but he's going at the 707 in FFPC drafts right now. He's going right behind Julian Edelman and Michael Gallup, right ahead of A.J. Green and Christian Kirk. Does that seem too high, too low, or just right to you, given what we know with Jarvis Landry right now with this surgery?
Yeah, no, I think I can't imagine him falling any farther than that, based on, the skills and, like a great receiver, great hands and things like that. Not probably a little more separation speed than most people think, but it's I think it's I think that's I think that's fairly priced, and as you say, as you monitor the news and things like that, I feel like he's one of those guys that's a good asset to a team, right? He could be sort of a piece of your team that maybe wasn't a huge element or factor in that, but a nice driving force each week, that type of thing.
News out of the Pacific Northwest, too, this week, as the Seattle Seahawks have signed a new tight end. It is Greg Olson, 1 year, $7 million. According to Pro Football Talk's Mike Florio, it is a $5.5 million guaranteed deal. So certainly Greg Olson did well for himself on this deal. He is not going to be an announcer. He's not going to be working in the media for at least one more season. He turns 35 in March, and obviously was saddled with some foot issues over the course of his career, especially the last 2 seasons. They didn't really come into play last year. 52 catches, 597 yards, 2 touchdowns, 11.5 yards a catch, and all that was with basically catching balls 90% of the time from one Kyle Allen. Now, Seattle loves to utilize their tight ends. We saw what Jacob Hollister did last season down the stretch. We saw what Will Dissly did last season with Seattle, and a couple of years ago what Jimmy Graham did with the double-digit touchdowns as well. So if he does stay healthy, you look at Greg Olson this year, Stephen, certainly it might be a pretty good value. Now, again, the ADP is not reflective on him signing with Seattle, but he was going at tight end 31 in the 20th round. He is going to move way up. At what point does Greg Olson in the draft cease to become a value? Is it round 15? Is it round 10? Is it something higher than that? What's the earliest you would look at Greg Olson now that you know he's going to be catching passes from Russell Wilson for the Seahawks?
Yeah, I think if you went any higher than like those numbers you had stated, I think that would probably be sort of a little ambitious, right? But yeah, no, I think I think he could fit, depending on kind of what your roster looks like at that time. But he's always been as long as he can stay on the field, he's always been a good tight end. And I think the thing with him, right, you look at what he's had to deal with his whole career. I mean, I think Cam Newton is probably one of the most overrated quarterbacks. I mean, and in fantasy, that doesn't mean anything because he puts up great fantasy numbers. But, I mean, you look at the accuracy. I mean, some of those playoff games they've been in, I mean, he's just – I mean, you or I at times could probably be more accurate. I mean, there'll be a tight end wide open 11 yards downfield, and it's not 2 feet over his head. It's 6 feet over his head, So, I think he'll benefit, obviously, from – a lot more proficient quarterback, in Russell Wilson. So
I like it, and I'm probably in agreement with you. It's so funny. I was ready to cut Greg Olson in some of my dynasty leagues, and just hang on, see what happens. And now I'm not expecting a ton from him this year, but if I get a 3rd-round rookie pick for him, at this point right now, I'd probably be pretty happy just to see what that rookie could give me, because I kind of know what Greg Olson's going to give me. I want to shift back to the focus of the Cleveland Browns here. Report coming out from Jake Trotter on Twitter saying that Alex Van Pelt, the new offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns, says he's going to be changing Baker Mayfield's footwork in this offseason, specifically in the 3-step drops in the shotgun. He has his right foot in front currently, but Van Pelt thinks that makes his footwork not so good when he's dropping back, which probably has led to some accuracy issues, which we've already seen on the field with Mayfield. Now, obviously, they're going to change some other stuff to his game, and the offense is going to be different. We don't know when Landry is going to be coming back as well. Mayfield took a big step back in 2019, but he could be a big bounce-back candidate with Beckham and Njoku and Landry and Nick Chubb and everybody like that around him in 2020. Mayfield, a guy who at certain points last year, Stephen, was going off as the quarterback 4 in FFPC drafts, he has fallen quite a bit this year. And if you want to draft Baker Mayfield, you don't have to soak a huge pick into it. He's going off as QB 15 in the early 10th round. And to me, I don't know what quarterbacks are going to be on this year, but I feel like I'm going to have a lot of Baker Mayfield at that point, given how low he's going in drafts and given what his ceiling could be.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, with him, you look at a lot of athletes in different sports, and they've won at every level, right? There's different, hockey players, that have won Stanley Cups and, different sports where, it's weird. Some of them you find out, 5 years into their career, someone say, oh, yeah, he won, I knew him in high school, and he won everything in high school and won everything in college. And everybody would think most athletes are like that, which I don't think they are. But I think he's kind of won at every level and really excelled at every level. So, I mean, I think you worry a little bit about the height, but, I mean, there's different ways to, kind of work around that, I think. And I think, working with someone, I don't know that much about Van Pelt, but I know, he's, I think he's sort of like a QB guru or something. I think I think that could really, could really help him, So I think you're spot on with that.
Yeah, he was Van Pelt. Obviously, was he was a backup quarterback in the NFL for the better part of a half decade, maybe even more than a half decade, and he actually spent, I think, a little bit more than 5 years as the quarterbacks coach in Green Bay under Aaron Rodgers. And Rodgers actually, when the Packers parted ways with Van Pelt, was not happy to see Van Pelt go. So I know that Aaron Rodgers was a big fan of him. We'll see what he can do with Baker Mayfield in 2020. Certainly the sky is the limit there, no question. Let's talk. Let's keep it in the same division here and talk a little A.J. Green here because Zach Taylor, the head coach of the Bengals, says that Cincinnati actually wants to keep A.J. Green on the roster in 2020, according to Pro Football Talk on NBCSports.com. I'm going to read the quote from Zach Taylor here. We're still working through that process. He's a guy that we are excited about to be a part of this team first and foremost, but right now we expect him to be a part of the team. So right now, obviously, things can change, and things will because A.J. Green's a free agent. But when you consider what A.J. Green brings to the table from a fantasy angle, he's going to be 30 years old before the start of the season. Over the last 64 games, over the past 4 seasons, he's only been playing in 35 of them, and that's including games that he left early due to injury. So as we look at it from a fantasy standpoint, Stephen, you look at A.J. Green, FFPC drafters are letting him go off at the 801 right now in drafts, right behind Gallup and Jarvis Landry, right ahead of Christian Kirk, John Brown, and Marquise Brown. Sky's the limit for A.J. Green, but would you still want to get in business with somebody like him in the early 8th round, given his age and his injury history and the unknown of where he's going to be playing in 2020?
I would probably say probably not, just because I think, I think, and this is just a guess really, but I think Zach Taylor, he came from like the Ram system, and I think they like to sort of spread it around to sort of multiple receivers, multiple facets of the offense, right? So I could see him bringing some of that offense, and I think they have some talent there at wide receiver, right? I mean, whether or not they're ready from a fantasy perspective or, maybe more from a football perspective or whatever, kind of doing some different things and, putting up some numbers, right? But, yeah, I mean, I think that could work out, but I think it's risky, right? But, I think he, again, is another one of those guys. I think if it fell sort of too much, it would be worth it. I thought about it this year with him, but, luckily I never kind of went that way. But, with him, I look at him, he's got a ton of heart. You can see that he plays the game the right way, right? So, as far as like rehabbing or something, whereas other guys like Beckham or something, right? I mean, I hate to be harping on that, but, it's like, a guy like that has so much heart is going to really work hard and come back and, play hard and, play the game the right way, I guess.
Final aspect, or final point I want to make before we get to the listener emails tonight is up in Minnesota from Tom Pelissaro from NFL Network. He says it's currently a long shot for the Vikings to get rid of Stephon Diggs, who has been very public about his frustration with his role in the offense, especially with Kirk Cousins. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the Vikings want to get rid of him. Stephon Diggs scrubbed all the Vikings references off his social media this past week, and Minnesota obviously, made it to the final 8 last year. They lost to San Francisco, but who didn't lose to San Francisco outside of Kansas City this past year? I don't know if they'd be in the business of wanting to trade a dynamic talent like Stephon Diggs. Tom Pelissero is reporting that he thinks NFL teams will call the Vikings to see what they're looking for Diggs. He doesn't expect Diggs to go anywhere in Minnesota. However, from a fantasy angle, this could always serve to be a detriment to him achieving his full fantasy value. He is going off at the 505 in FFPC drafts right now, wide receiver 18. What are your thoughts, Stephen, on Stephon Diggs, assuming he does stay in Minnesota next year and assuming that the Vikings keep these distractions to a minimum?
Yeah, I guess I'd kind of go similar to what I talked about earlier with some of the other receivers. Like I look, I think there's a guy, the guru, John Hansen, he talks about body language, right? Like I like to look at that, and to me, like, I look at him with Cousins, and I see no chemistry there, right? Whether or not Cousins is still there, it seems like he will be, right? And unless something changes from like a scheme perspective or something, I really don't see I don't really see him kind of doing better than what he's already shown. I mean, it was kind of interesting. I remember his rookie year, I'll play in these local Yahoo leagues, and someone picked him up, and I thought, man, I was like, I never really heard that much about him, like before he kind of came onto the scene, and, not that means anything, but it was just he just sort of came on, and looked great, and then sort of, I feel like every year since he's sort of had like a couple of years, but he strikes me as like inconsistent. I think people fall in love with, oh yeah, go look at his Twitter page. He's working out like crazy or something. It seems to me like, some of that self-promotion, you got to kind of be able to analyze that and sort of look at all the angles, right? So I guess that would be my take on that.
I want to, I don't know how many emails we're going to get to tonight here, but my goal is 2 here in the next few minutes as we're about 6 minutes from closing out the show tonight. First email tonight is from Dave in Deerfield Beach, Florida. He writes, hey, Balky and Steven, which running back would you rather draft this season, Chris Carson or Devin Singletary? And I think this is interesting because, by the way, thank you for the email, Dave, in Florida, in Deerfield Beach. I want to bring this up because Chris Carson is actually going fairly close to where Devin Singletary is going this season in FFPC best balls, at least right now. Chris Carson going off as RB19 at the 402. And then you look at Devin Singletary, and he is actually going off as RB17, so 2 running backs higher at the 312. So if you want one of these guys, Steven, you're probably only going to be getting one of them unless, you're on the turn there and you can somehow get both of them, which is entirely possible. But if you can only pick one, are you going with Carson or are you going with Singletary?
Boy, that's a tough one. That's pretty close. I think I would, would probably lean towards Singletary just based on, he looks pretty dynamic. He looks, to be kind of a big part of that offense, right? I would probably go there. It's pretty close, I would think, but, and I think both of them are unknown. I think both of them haven't hit maybe what they're gonna, eventually hit possibly. So, but I think I'd probably lean a little more towards Singletary, I think.
I first of all, I'm in agreement with you, and the reason why is because you are looking at a situation where Singletary he doesn't have to contend with Frank Gore, at least not right now. Gore is a free agent, and I forget who the other running back is, the former rugby player that Sean McDermott was actually recently talking up, and I can't remember this is going to drive me nuts. But anyway. It's not anybody that great. And then you're looking at TJ Yeldon. Okay, so that's the competition for Devin Singletary. Who's competition for Chris Carson? Well, not only does he have to stay healthy, but he's also trying to fend off a first-round pick in Rashad Penny. So I think for me, when you're splitting hairs, when you're picking at nits, I look at the supporting cast there, and I think that Singletary definitely has less of a threat to touches than Chris Carson would. So I would actually go Singletary there as well. Totally in agreement with you. I want to get to one more email before we have to call it tonight, and that is from Tyler in Bristol, Pennsylvania. He writes, I know it seems nuts, but am I crazy to draft Devontae Parker over Calvin Ridley right now? Thanks, dudes, and thank you, Tyler, in Bristol, Pennsylvania, for the email. Always appreciate that. So it's coming down to him. He likes Devontae Parker, the breakout Miami Dolphins receiver, over Calvin Ridley right now. They're both going at the 5'11", wide receiver 20, wide receiver 21 in FFPC best ball drafts right now. If you can only pick one, Steven, who's it going to be? Is it going to be Parker or is it going to be Ridley?
Oh, man, that's another close one. I'd probably say Parker. It looks like, someone that's, had a ton of potential and ton of upside, and then, just, sort of might just be clicking with him now, right? Or I don't know if there was injuries there or something, but I kind of like that offense too. They have, a few other good receivers and things like that. So I think kind of for them, right, it's like, there's, as far as like that whole, positive regression, right? There's nowhere to go but up almost, or laterally or slightly up. So I think that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind, too, is, you saw Preston Williams get hurt last year, and he was obviously crushing it. And when he got hurt, then you saw Parker take the big leap forward. So there's some question, was Parker's breakout only a function of Preston Williams being hurt? Well, maybe, but you got to remember, Parker is the pedigreed guy there. Williams was the undrafted free agent, and Parker was the guy that developed all this chemistry while Williams is being hurt. So I think you look at the end of the 5th round. If you're uncomfortable with that narrative, then don't take Parker, and then definitely take Ridley. That's fine. But I think Parker represents a certain amount of upside. The fact that I think the Miami's probably still going to be throwing quite a bit this year. And then you look conversely, Ridley's not the number 1 on his team. Julio Jones is still the number 1 guy there. So as much as you might like Ridley over Parker, and some people do, you still have to combat that. And there's a chance that Parker's the number 1, Ridley's the number 2, and then who would you rather take when it's about the same? I'm not sure what I would do there, but I think I'm leaning towards Parker as well over Ridley. So certainly something to be paying attention to. I'm sure the ADP will fluctuate as the season goes on. Hey, we're still in late February. A lot can happen. We're going to cover it all right here, thanks to great minds like Stephen Ranaghan, a winner of nearly $500,000 over the last year and a half in high-stakes fantasy football contests. Of course, the 4th place team in the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge this past season. Stephen, I want to thank you for hopping aboard tonight and hanging out with me on a Friday night late in February talking fantasy football. Always good to catch up with you, my man. Congrats on all the success, and I wish you nothing but the best in 2020.
Yeah, hey, thank you very much. Just a couple of things. I want to thank your company.
Go ahead.
They've been nothing but I think they've been nothing but great, for folks like me and probably for many other players where, it was late or something and, there was a deadline and I said, look, I can't get this in. And, folks like Chris and Alex are just like, don't worry about it. We'll put it in and, we'll work with, whatever the timelines are and things like that. So, like I said, the site's great. You guys are awesome. And I think you need to hire Howard Bender as your promoter or something, man. That guy, he gets so excited when you get on the show. But, I feel like I'm on with like a star when I'm talking to you. So it's, like I said, we've had various email conversations and things like that. So I know you're very well respected in the industry, and it was an honor to speak with you. And like I said, I enjoy your product and everything. So it's great.
Well, Stephen, kind words from you. That's awesome. Certainly, I for all the listeners, take it with a grain of salt. One of us has won nearly $500,000. The other has not. So we know where the fantasy expertise came on the show tonight. Dude, but in all seriousness, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Congratulations on all your success. And who knows, maybe you're going to be cashing the main event, the Football Guys Players Championship or the Playoff Challenge this upcoming season. You're on a heater right now, man. Don't give that up.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Stephen, we'll talk to you again real soon, dude. Thanks again.
Take care of yourself. Thank you.
Stephen Ranaghan, ladies and gentlemen, the 4th place team in the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge this past season, obviously cashing in a pair of $200,000 grand prizes in the fantasy industry. You do not get heavy hitters on like this any other day of the week or any other podcast. So certainly great to talk with Stephen tonight, and look forward to him being at the top of the leaderboards again this season. If you see him in your draft room with the Football Guys Players Championship, the main event, or a classic, a best ball or whatever, be wary and be paying attention to who he's choosing, because he definitely knows his stuff, as he came through with all of that tonight. That is going to do it for our show, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank Stephen Ranaghan for coming on the program tonight. I want to thank the FFPC, Rob, Bryce, and, of course, each and every one of you who tuned in live and who are streaming, downloading, listening live. Always appreciate that. Dave will be back next Friday at 10/9 Central. We will be able to talk to him again and find out how his big weekend was. I believe he's on the West Coast again this week. So we'll talk to him about that next week. I want to remind you, check out those Best Ball Slim leagues that we just launched this past week. Actually, just today, this morning, Friday morning. 18 rounds, no kickers, no defenses. You wanted it, you got it, baby. Dynasty Orphans available, main event early bird available as well. Your weekend officially starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com that was broadcast live and heard around the world. Eric and Dave will be back next week with more analysis, interviews, and advice from a guest much smarter than they are. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
We're on the Seaman floor, even more so if we on tour. Me and E explore the country, wondering about the evening before. Trying to explain where the time went, while other rappers find a studio to grind in.
Just thinking about back on the show tonight, I think if there's one thing to take away from Stephen Ranaghan, this is a guy who has been playing the FFPC, the Football Guys Players Championship, many other contest formats for many, many years. And for whatever reason, over the last year and a half, he cashed big in 2018, cashed huge in 2019. And when you ask a guy like that, what was the difference? Because you've basically been the successful high-stakes player for many, many years until you took it to a new level in 2018 and 2019. What was the difference? What did you change? And he basically said, I didn't change much. It was very minor tweaks. I just was a little bit more attentive. I had my ears a little bit more open. I was a little bit more aggressive on the waiver wire, and sometimes, that's all it takes. You feel like you have a bad draft. You feel like you weren't as successful as you wanted to be early in the season. Keep grinding. Keep going away, and it's good advice for life, too. If you're not liking where you're at in a certain part of your life or a certain part of your fantasy season, I think just that little extra effort can make all the difference in the world. Something to keep in mind when you're paying attention to those waiver wires. Setting those lineups later on in the season in 2020 could be the difference, between not cashing and cashing a six-figure grand prize. You never know. Thanks so much for listening. Always appreciate all you guys tuning in each and every week. We'll be back next week. Have a great February weekend.